Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is Dr. Filomena Trindade and I'm going to talk to you today about menopause. Yeah, right, not so exciting. Well, unfortunately us women will all go through it at some point in our lives, some a little sooner than others. But it's important that we understand what menopause is and what leads to it and what are some of the things that we can do, number one, but also how can we sort of be prepared? How can we prepare ourselves? How can we look for signs and symptoms that may mean we're getting there so we can rebalance our hormones? Because what is the menopause? Well, if you look at the technical and scientific definition, it is the cessation of menses that has occurred for at least a year. For you to be in menopause, you have to not have had a period for a whole year, 12 months. But that, to me, that's not what's important. What's important are the symptoms. And we know that some women will start to have symptoms from age 35 and on, sometimes even sooner. But 35 is where I start to see more women coming in with symptoms of what I call the perimenopause. What does peri mean? It means the area around or close to. So you're starting to get close to menopause and you're having perimenopausal symptoms. Now, the average age of menopause in the US is 51 years, but we want to start and look for signs and symptoms way before we actually hit menopause. Why we want to try and figure out what could be a symptom of a hormone imbalance. Because to me, that's where the money is. That's what's important, is to look for those symptoms that you're having some hormone imbalance. Because then that could be fixed. And the earlier we diagnose it, the earlier we know about it, the better. So for example, you can start to have symptoms of a hormone imbalance, which could be fatigue. It could be that your period starts to become a little irregular. Maybe it used to be like clockwork every 28 days, and now it's coming every 32 days. Or maybe it's coming sooner, every 23 or 24 days. Those are all signs of a hormone imbalance, things that we can correct. And for example, when we go through menopause, we lose some of our hormones, predominantly estrogen. That's what we think of. That's what most women think about. That's what most people think about. But it is actually not true that we do. It is true that we lose estrogen. It's just not the first hormone that we lose or that starts to decline. The first hormone that starts to decline is actually either progesterone or testosterone. I feel that testosterone has been the forgotten women's hormone because we think about it in terms of men, but testosterone is extremely important for women as well. And not just for libido, not just for your sex drive, but for bone health, right? For muscle strength, for you to be able to rebuild muscle as well as bone. So in some women, testosterone will decline first. In other women, progesterone will decline first, followed by testosterone, and then eventually your estrogen. But I want to also talk about another hormone that is what I call an upstream hormone that can affect your estrogen, your progesterone, your testosterone, even your thyroid, for example. And that is a hormone that goes up with age. It's the only hormone that I can think of that goes up or increases with age. And that's cortisol, the hormone of stress. Now, we all have increasing numbers of cortisol, or levels I should say, as we age. That is something that we cannot change. But we can change how much that happens. We can counteract that as well, because cortisol is a catabolic hormone. It is a breakdown hormone. And so we need to increase our anabolic hormones to counteract that so that we are not always losing muscle mass, for example, or becoming more sarcopenic, which means having more body fat and less muscle mass. So think of cortisol as an upstream hormone in that it has more downstream effects on your thyroid gland, for example, or the effects of your thyroid hormones, as well as your sex hormones, which are your progesterone, your testosterone, and your estrogen. And how do we monitor that? Well, basically, Number one, it's when we're more stressed, and when we're stressed, cortisol goes up. There's, of course, your laboratory evaluations that you can do, and for cortisol, we know that the saliva test is better than the serum because you get to see it throughout the day. But I want to also consider even a further upstream hormone. And believe it or not, it is insulin. And we are living in times where we see more and more undiagnosed insulin resistance. And you don't have to be overweight to be insulin resistant. We often think that you have to have increased body fat, and you can be the thin fat person where you look thin on the outside, but inside you have increased levels of fat. And that does happen. So let's review what I just said. I said that insulin resistance can happen in anyone with any body shape or any body fat. In other words, you don't have to be overweight. You don't even have to have increased visceral adiposity, which means you don't even have to have increased fat in your body, even though you're thin, to be insulin resistant. And the numbers of insulin resistance are increasing. So I want you to start thinking about your levels of insulin, or you being insulin resistant, particularly when you start, or before I should say, you start having symptoms of menopause. I feel that that is something we all should be asking our doctors to have it examined, to have a look at your levels of fasting insulin, but also your levels of glycation, which is your hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C is a measure of how much there was competition with sugar for oxygen, because that is a measure of how much sugar or glucose is bound to your hemoglobin, which is the part in your red blood cell that carries or attaches to oxygen. So think of your most upstream hormone affecting the hormone balance and your menopause or your perimenopause being insulin, followed by cortisol, right? Because insulin can affect cortisol, it can affect thyroid function, it can affect your sex hormones. So I think of it as a tier. Insulin being a major hormone, followed by cortisol, followed by thyroid, and then next would be your sex hormones. Because I think of it that way because there's more downstream effects from insulin than vice versa. So insulin, if it is elevated, can cause more imbalance in the cortisol. I always say when insulin is up, it always calls its buddy cortisol. So insulin can affect cortisol, can affect thyroid, can affect your sex hormones. Cortisol doesn't have as much effects upstream in terms of affecting insulin. It's more downstream. So cortisol can affect your thyroid, can affect your sex hormones. They all work together and affect each other. But I want you to start thinking of at the top, or sort of major hormone being insulin, that can cause or wreak havoc with the balance of your other hormones. So at age 30, 35, even sooner if you can, I feel that everyone should be having a hemoglobin A1C and a fasting insulin done annually with your exam to make sure that your levels are normal. And we want in the blood insulin, for example, a level of 2 to 5. 5 is sort of my cutoff, even though some literature says 5 to 7 is still okay. I want to be perfect. I want to be ideal. So that would be 5. And your hemoglobin A1C in the blood, if you want it 5.3 or less, because that's where your risk starts to increase. So, to recap, we want to start thinking about hormone imbalance and symptoms of hormone imbalance. And we want to think of the sort of the flow, or how hormones affect each other. Think about insulin and how it can cause dysregulations in your other hormones. Cortisol as well, because when we're stressed, our body's not able to sort of make progesterone as well. There's something that's called the cortisol steal. It's really a diversion. It's when you're in a state of stress, the precursors can be used to make, which is progesterone, for example, can be used to make cortisol, or the stress hormone, instead of going downstream or being around as progesterone. But the other thing I haven't focused on yet that I want to mention is, what are some of the symptoms that you can feel that can lead you to believe that you may have a imbalance in your hormones. Well, it can be that you're moody and you're more tired, or maybe you're only moody, a few weeks or a few days before your period. That is important, and especially if that has increased, right? So changes in your sense of humor, but also you feeling more stressed. Some people are stressed and don't necessarily feel it because there's many different causes of stress, but I want particularly you to pay attention if you feel like little things set you off, or you don't handle stress as well as you used to, or you're more emotional, things that normally you could handle without even taking a second thought, all of a sudden now becomes an issue or becomes a bigger deal. Also, sleep. Changes in your sleep, either falling asleep or staying asleep. That can be a sign of hormone imbalance. Changes in your weight. Not just weight gain or weight loss, but weight distribution. Maybe you're gaining more weight around your middle or your waist. That can be due to high cortisol, but it can also be due to high insulin. Changes in your muscle mass. And maybe you're not able to gain as much muscle mass as you used to, even though you were working out. And changes with your hair and your skin. Is your skin drier? Is your hair falling more? And how is it falling? Is it more in the front? Is it more in the back? Is it uniform? Is it more on the top of your head? These are all symptoms that can lead to, or that give us an idea that perhaps there is a hormone imbalance. And so to recap, I started talking about menopause and the perimenopause, but really we're talking about changes in the hormone balance, right? And your hormones being out of balance, and how there is the perimenopausal period, which is a period where we can start to have symptoms of menopause, and some of which I haven't mentioned, like you can have more headaches or hot flashes or night sweats, right? We associate that with the perimenopause, but hot flashes can also be due to high insulin or high cortisol, for example. So it's important that whenever we see any changes in our body, in our sense of humor, in our skin, in our hair, that in our sleep patterns, for example, that we start to link that with perhaps there's a hormone imbalance, and you want to make sure that you get that evaluated and taken care of. So I hope this has been useful to you. My best, and I hope you have an awesome day.